Afternoon, everyone. Thanks to those that are here. I'm assuming we'll get a few more people sort of appear as we go. So, as I said, really just another opportunity to catch up, ask questions, see how we're going. It means us, sort of me and Graham, and ask one another things as we go along if there's anything you want clarification on. But I think I'm always a big fan if we get a chance to do this sort of together and share bits and pieces with one another. It's a really good opportunity. So I've got a couple of questions here that sort of Louise has sent through from other people that I can't see on the call at the moment. So I might just sort of hang off on those ones in case they do appear so they can actually have the live answers. So I thought maybe we might sort of throw things open just to start with to see how people are going, if there are any questions for those that are here to get started with, and then I'll make sure we get to the other ones as we go. So is there anything anyone wants to know, anything anyone wants to say or share, sort of as they know that they're here? Don't all jump in at once.
I'm happy to have a go.
Thanks, Leslie.
I'm still really confused about the new way of doing bad and doubtful debts, particularly if there are already bad debts, like in the trial balance, or if there's further bad debts in the additional information.
Yep.
And I feel like it's not very clear. I really like answers to the sample exam, to the first question on the sample exam, because I don't know if I've done it right or not, and I find it really unnerving to try and teach something I'm not understanding myself.
That's fair enough, Leslie. Well, I have some very good news for you on that one. We've been chatting, SACE has been chatting, and they have decided that we can provide some solutions to that sample exam. So we're going to make them available shortly. But I do have a little look at some of them, and given you've mentioned that one particularly, so I thought I might throw that up in a second. Just to start with on your comment as far as how it fits, the sample exam sort of has thrown up an extra question, which having had a look at it now and being the first year, I had a couple of people ask me about it. It's not hard to do with the bad debts that are in there already, but I think it's just an extra level of complexity that we don't need people to be worrying about at the moment. So what I might do is, what's the easiest way for me to do this? Let me see if I can share. Where's the one I want? That one there. So hopefully you guys can see sort of the screen coming up here, which is, we've saved some potential examples. So, and just sort of a note on this one, a writer sort of, when you have a look at these ones, they are possible responses. I think for anyone that's been involved in the marking before, you'll be aware of this, but the marking process, we have an idea about what the answers probably should be, but when student responses come in, we do take them into account and have a look at them and see potentially how students have interpreted things to make sure we're being fair and reasonable with all of those ones. So when you look through these ones, if you would have answered it in a different way, or you think students might have answered it slightly differently, but have sort of answered the question, then doesn't mean your answer is particularly wrong. A lot of them, there is only one answer, but some of them, there's a little bit of flexibility. So one little note I did have in there, I'll just put this up the top here, to make that first question a little bit easier for you, Leslie. I think getting rid of the bad debts in the trial balance would make things easier. And so I just suggested, for the purpose of this one and working sort of with students for the first time sort of round, deleting that one and then just increasing the rates expense to cover that one off so it all stays in balance is the best way to do it. If it was still there, it would just be a matter of going through the process of effectively doing what we've done before, closing that one off. I was having a discussion with Louise earlier in the week, and I said one of the difficulties that sort of we put ourselves in as accounting teachers is that accounting's not a black letter law subject. It's principles based. So there are sometimes different ways of doing the right thing. And so just to sort of be aware of that. So sometimes, and particularly when you're looking at textbooks or other people's work, they might approach things in a slightly different way. There isn't just one absolute way done around the world. So probably just for your one, Leslie, as far as how to deal with this one, I thought maybe if I go down to the actual income statement, because that, in this question, that's the only place the bad debts actually needs to be dealt with. So I might just pop down here, because when I was looking at this one before, I'll make it a bit bigger. What I put down here is just a little bit of a calculation. Now, obviously, that wouldn't normally go on the income statement if I put it in there for people to have a look at. And so this one deals with, in the question, there was those additional bad debts still to be written off, so they hadn't been dealt with as yet. I think that's what you're asking sort of about. So if that's the case, writing off a bad debt under sort of the new method, if we want to sort of talk about it that way, requires the allowance account to be reduced. So normally that's a credit balance, so that will be debited, and the debtors account to be reduced. So that one's being credited. It's effectively the same as what you did before, but previously what you would have done was debit the bad debt expense, credit the debtor, and then you would have closed that bad debt expense off to the allowance account. So it's just taking out really one step along the way. So when there's any additional ones that haven't been accounted for, reduce the debtors figure, reduce the allowance figure. And once you've got that information, you're really in the same spot you're at before. So for this one, it was 10% of debtors, so that gave us what we wanted our allowance to be, that 3786 there. This is what's in the allowance at the moment, the 1824. And so really what we're trying to establish then is what we need to adjust that allowance by to get to where we want to be, which is this 1962 number there.
Yep.
Is that kind of...
Yep, no, that's very helpful.
Helpful. I did sort of, in looking at these ones and putting some answers together, I deliberately used sort of as the expense there, bad and doubtful debts. And I actually should have written expense on the end there. I might add that afterwards. Whether it's bad and doubtful debts, whether it's doubtful debts, whether it's bad debts, that's an interchangeable term. I'm really sort of not too sort of worried about that one. If it's in the expense and they've put that one in there, the accounting standards actually don't differentiate between them. But the only time you really need to be able to differentiate between what's a bad debt and a doubtful debt is if we were talking about it from a theory point of view, and wanting students to say, well, the bad debt is the one that definitely has gone bad and you're never going to collect, whereas the doubtful one is an estimation of what might go bad in the future. But it's kind of we're looking at there. So is that, Leslie, you kind of happier?
It's just so you see it in this context, but because I've already done, we're more than 6 months into our curriculum, and I've taught debtors control too, which often has the allowance for doubtful debts and often has a debtors control account. And I feel that students will most likely write off the bad debts and not allowance to doubtful debts in that debtors T account. Hoping that that's not going to count against them in the exam. I mean, I can go back and teach that way, but I feel like they've been jerked around enough this year, and for me to reteach, because I did add in the like the other things that were in the facts sheet, which I didn't see until May. I feel like I just keep saying, well, this is how we used to do it, but now we're changing it. So I feel like I've created a lot of uncertainty in my students already.
I was in the same situation as you, and I had already taught like the old way of bad and doubtful debts, but then I just like reintroduced it, and they seem to get the new way a lot easier. Because there's like a pattern to it, so they could see the pattern and how the numbers would go in. So I don't know, like I said I taught you the old way, so this is the new way, and they're accepting of that. So I don't know.
And particularly from that point of view, Jess, if you've taught it before, I mean, when they look at the new, we keep saying the new way, it's the old way for me, because it's sort of, I think I've done it sort of the other way for many, many years at uni. But one of the other things to be mindful of is the process is the same. So, Leslie, you were saying before, where you've actually said to them they should be writing it off to that debtor's control account, they would still be doing that sort of under this method. It's just a matter of what we did in the past. We said, well, sort of, you need to record the bad debt expense and write it off at debtor's control. And then at the end of the year, you take that bad debt expense and you needed to put that into the allowance account to a certain extent anyway, or you needed to sort of factor that in. So it's sort of that one sort of one less step, I suppose, to a certain extent. But going back to your point, as far as we're definitely mindful of the fact that students have had a tough year, teachers have had a tough year this year. And so new subject outline, everything else that's gone on. When it comes to marking, really the process isn't any different. We have a look at what the students are doing, how they've treated things. There's generally a preferred way of doing things, but the students aren't going to be disadvantaged. I mean, if we start finding that students are consistently doing it sort of under that old method, but they're actually answering the question correctly, so they're not going to be saying, well, that's completely wrong. We're hoping sort of most students have been able to sort of move ahead with it, but we will be sort of mindful of that. So,
and can I just say as well, Scott, I'd already done a concept test on debtors control before I realised that I was teaching it wrong. So will that same idea flow over to moderation? I mean, my test is not going to match what you want us to do. So,
and my simple answer to that is sort of, maybe it's a bit simplistic, but from a moderation point of view, I don't look at sort of the detail of your tests sort of in a simpler way as possible. I look at sort of, has it got the right concepts, and then how have you assessed it? So if you believe that they've actually got the understanding there, that's fine. So yeah, I'm never going to dig down into a test and go, oh, I didn't like the way you marked that question, so therefore all your grades are going to come down. The only thing would be if you'd left the whole topic out and I never see it anywhere, that's a concern. But as far as how you've taught it,
do it wrong, but not at all.
Definitely not. I mean, from that point of view, I don't think I've seen in the last couple of years, I don't know, Graham, whether you recall, but we did have a few years there where some moderated tasks came through where teachers were asking students to dispose of non-current assets and do all those sort of wonderful things that we did maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And so more than that. So that if you remember back that far. So, including those tasks in there sort of was to a certain extent a waste of time because they're not part of the subject outline, so we couldn't count them towards this one. It's a slight tweak on it, but no, definitely don't stress about that one, Claire.
Okay, thank you.
Any other sort of thoughts or questions on that one? While I'm thinking about bits and pieces. Okay, just while I'm here, we're talking about this debtors one, just to, I was just trying to see in this question, there was a debtors control account in there, but this particular one didn't have a doubtful debt sort of to be put into the control account, so wasn't going to show up sort of particularly there in the sample one. Other thoughts or questions from anyone sort of at this stage? Anything jumping?
Yeah, I just have a question about the question book 2, and the question on the sources of finance.
Yep.
It's like worth 10 marks.
Yep.
Comparing two sources. So where do you see those 10 marks going to?
Right.
Like, are you looking for an evaluation of the two sources, like advantages and disadvantages? So outlining the source of finance, the advantages and the disadvantages.
That would be sort of probably my starting point. I think on that one and looking at those marks, sort of one thing to keep in mind is the marks there are more of a guide rather than absolute, if you like. That last written part, report, letter, email, whatever format the students produced it in, they're asked to produce it in, it's going to be worth about 25 marks. Now, the reason we decided to put the marks in there was really to signpost to students how much time to spend on it. So, because initially I think when we wrote it up, we had the 3 dot points there, and no marks, and then we started looking at it and going, if a student spends 3/4 of their time talking about the trends and risks, which we'd like them to sort of touch on and show us a little bit of knowledge on, but if they spend 3/4 of their time on that and only write 1 sentence on the 2 sources of finance, they've got the balance all wrong. So I think, Jess, from what you sort of said, identifying a couple of them, what a couple of options were, advantages, disadvantages, sort of why they might want to go down one path or another.
Sure. And then with that overall question, the trends and risks, are we looking at like, actually, no, there was another question that was about like the environment. Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. Oh, never mind. Ignore that.
No, that's all right. Well, I mean, on that trends and risks, because I have had people ask me about it before, one of my big things for that one is there's no expectation that people know anything about potato farming.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if they happen to, that's great. But it was really sort of in your discussion with students, I'm hoping sort of during the year, you've talked about sort of generally sort of trends, risks, the ideas of sort of how businesses work and where the accounting info fits in from that. There should also be a bit of information, enough info to get them started on that. So, I mean, if you look through that question, clearly it talks about sort of her getting access to water is important for the farm.
Yeah, just on that, part C was the one I was thinking of, and it says discuss what Joy should consider apart from the quantitative accounting information when deciding whether to purchase a water license.
Yeah.
I thought that question was kind of asking like that is looking at, say, the environmental impact or the social impact on that. Is that correct to assume that?
Yeah, that's where I'd be looking. Graham's nodding there. Yes. That's when you've had a look at Graham. What?
Yeah, and also back to the comparison of two sources of finance, this is where I would get the students to go back to the financial statements. And in that question, they took out 120,000. So why they take money out? Could they use that money to purchase it as well?
Yeah, sure.
Just have a deep analysis of all the financial statements, and that's where you'll get extra mark, and that's where you'll see the A+ students getting those extra grades there.
Yeah, cool.
So looking at things like that.
Yep.
I would get my kids to look at, even quickly do ratios and look at like, are they highly geared already? And would that be best to do that or not? The question did not ask them to do that there, but that's, if they really want to extend themselves, that's the type of things kids could be looking at.
So they're looking outside the question too.
Yes, looking outside.
The broader concepts,
Yeah. Just like we would do in the previous one where we had to do that report, we do those ratios and the kids will make decisions on there. So whenever you're going to buy an asset of some sort, it's got to be financed somehow. So the kids need to be considering those type of things.
Yep.
And I think we said pick on two. There's probably sort of, I have a look at it, there's probably 3 or 4 different ways they could go. I mean, I wouldn't expect them to be talking about sort of trying to run up an overdraft for a $450,000 machine. But at the same time, I mean, if a student did start talking about that, but then went into great detail about why it's inappropriate, I think that's still sort of a good discussion. So, I mean, that's still going to be rewarded. It's probably not the most obvious one. And so therefore, and probably limits a bit what they can talk about. But we're not going to look at it and go, well, sort of it's completely wrong. It's definitely going to be, from our point of view, an interesting time. And any of you that are putting your hands up to do some marking this year, when we get to mark these ones, to see how students respond to them. And sort of we'll be mindful of that as we go through. And to come back to that other one, part C, I think the environmental, the social stuff is a good one to talk about there. I mean, I was looking at it now. I mean, in the information, it talks about the fact that she can guarantee access to the water herself. But then the flip side of that is that means that potentially other farmers can't get it. So, so it's really just getting to think about that qualitative stuff.
And again, also in the D one as well, two sources of finance, you could also get students to look at, or they could look at, a partner, adding additional partner for additional capital as well as a possible answer.
Cool.
Doesn't say, we wouldn't mark a student wrong if they didn't put it there, but there's an additional type of answer. So it could go any direction, really, that answer.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I suppose the other thing in looking at this part 2 and the way it's deliberately been set up is if you look through those first sort of A, B, C parts, they were designed as a little bit of scaffolding to get students start thinking about those things. So while I'm not looking for the same answers to be in part D, some of the things you've started to talk about in those earlier ones might just prompt them a little bit sort of in that part D as they bring it all together.
Cool.
Yeah.
I was just going to sort of just ask a bit more on that, just in terms of the range that's sort of going to be tolerated with that, because like you're talking about ratios, but it's not sort of mentioned as part of the structuring there. Yep. Like what type of range could be accepted within this question, and is there going to be some sort of, when you put those answers out, will there be some sort of guidelines in terms of what markers are looking for with this one? Or
probably as far as the guidelines, Nathan, goes, probably not so much the marking. I mean, there'll be some general sort of discussion about areas to look at. I think Graham's point sort of, I mean, I would expect students to sort of use the information there. And so sort of first glance, sort of your average student will just be able to sort of look over the financial statements and get a bit of a picture of it. The better students are going to want to drill down into it a little bit more. Sort of a couple of ratios, and again, that's a matter of picking the right ones, ones they think are going to be useful. They'll all sort of factor into the score. So as I said, the marks as they're set out, sort of the 10, 5, 5 and 5 there, sort of aren't absolutes. They're supposed to be more as a guide. So, but if you're talking about sources of finance, I'd probably expect to see some sort of ratio calculation, a debt ratio or something in there, possibly.
And the way we're talking about this, I'm sort of guessing there'll be some sort of structure like this in the exam.
In the final exam?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what you're seeing as far as the sample exam goes, sort of from layout point of view, it's going to be familiar. And that was one of the drivers for putting a sample one out this time rather than saying draw on old questions. In the past, you've always looked at the past exams to see what's coming up in this year's exam, and so similar sort of setup. The names and numbers will be changed to protect the innocent, I promise, but yeah, I don't want students to be surprised. I don't want teachers to be surprised when they see the final exam. That's not the point of an exam.
And I would say with the ratio one, that the ratio they choose, it has to flow. So for example, if they said bank and then said like inventory turnover and then reason to see how quickly the inventories turn over, that's not helping the bank at all. So I would see bank, debt to equity, you know, that type of thing, or a solvency type ratio, and the reason why. That's what I'll expect there. That it all flows along. Yeah.
You probably could get that to flow in though, in terms of profitability, and if it's a profitable business with cash flow problems or something like that. Yeah, so there could be ways. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, but if they said the reason was just to see how quickly the stock's turning over, wouldn't be a sufficient answer. I would say that wouldn't be a sufficient answer. But it could be, but it comes down to the reasoning behind that.
Okay, yeah.
And again, that's probably in part D where they could probably delve into more of that reasoning, sort of saying, well, look, normally the bank would want to know debt, but inventory would be interesting because if they're actually able to sell their stuff, but again, they'll need to explain it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on that one at the moment, or any?
So we'd be expecting them to write for about 30 minutes. I think it says on the front of that 50 minutes, so 25 out of the 40. About 30 minutes of writing. Whatever that equates to in minutes, is that about 400 or 500 words or something? Or
probably around about that. I mean, it's one of those ones that sort of in having worked through these ones and sort of done answers to the sample and that sort of stuff, those first 3 questions, the time we've allowed is probably a little bit generous. It works as far as the marks go, but they tend to, I've got through them fairly quickly. Now I know I was involved in sort of writing and that, so I should sort of get through them reasonably quickly, but I always say students are actually reasonably fast as well because they're practiced at it. So 30 minutes is probably sort of a good guide, Nathaniel, but I would expect they'll probably give themselves a bit more time than that to do that one. As I said, it's going to be a little bit how long's a piece of string as far as how long these responses come out as being. I mean, I know there's going to be some students that are absolutely going to smash it out of the park and write stacks and stacks. I wouldn't have been one of those students. Mine would be a few hundred words. I mean, one of the other things to sort of be mindful of, and just to point out to students, I suppose, is when you look at the mark breakdown there is 5 marks there around the communication. And we kept it separate, particularly to highlight the fact that sort of the way it's written and how you communicate it, or how you communicate the information is important. So an extremely long response that really goes round and round in circles and doesn't make the point, sort of won't score as well, I would have thought, as a short one that's concise and does actually make its points nice and crisply and clearly. Or at least it definitely won't outscore it just because it's longer.
About quality over quantity. So I think that's something with the online, kids are writing more but not writing better.
Yep. And so I think that's something just to keep in mind, and that was part of it there. And I mean, the point is down the bottom there, it does say advice can be provided in dot point form, so there's no dramas with that. But again, sort of something, sort of even within dot points, you can actually be a little bit expressive within dot points, so you can make the points sort of concisely, but I mean, if you're able to tie them all together, and depends how they're laid out, and it will depend on the form as well. I think we've talked in the past sort of about the idea that if you were providing it as maybe an email to a client, having a few dot points in there would make sense at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
Even in a formal report, you might have a couple of dot points within sort of other bits and pieces, whereas if you were writing a letter to a client, sort of more of a formal letter, then probably the dot points wouldn't. So that's where it's understanding the form of communication, and we're leaving that reasonably open to students. They're going to have a bit of choice as far as how they present it. They can pick the one that they think best suits the question and themselves as well to a certain extent. So,
and I'm guessing here this lends itself to analysis and evaluations performance standards that this is checked against. So
yep.
Imagine if you're performing well on those standards, you should be performing well on this.
Yeah, I think so. I think it says it on this one. It's in the subject outline. If I pull that one out, so part 2 is particularly looking at.
All the twos.
All the twos. That's the one, Louise. Thank you. So I get my letters confused sometimes. What do I do? There it is over there. Subject outline. So I know it's AE2. What are my other letters? We'll get to those ones. Yeah, AE2, AP2, sort of, and even UE2. So I mean, when you look at them, sort of AE2 talks about analysis and evaluation, but one of the things you'll notice with all the 2 ones is we're really talking about stakeholders. So focusing on who's getting this information, who's interested in it. So AE2 is analysis and evaluation to develop and propose accounting advice to stakeholders. UE2 is exploration and interpretation of accounting information needs of stakeholders. So that one's going the other way, going, what do stakeholders actually want to know about? And then the AP2 is looking at this application of communication skills in that accounting context. So it's not this one looking so much at creating accounting information. So that's why the ratios in our old reports and that, we said, do some ratios first. You need to create some information. This time we're saying you don't have to create it. If you do, because that helps, and that might then feed back into, well, if you're looking at the needs of the stakeholders and they need that ratio, then it's probably worth doing that one calculation rather than being a big part of it. So, I'm doing lots of talking at the moment. I'm happy to hear more from you guys. Graham, jump in whenever. Tell me to be quiet.
No, I'm fine.
I thought the trial, like the practice sample exam, was quite good, but I did find that question 1 took a lot longer than the other sections. And I had a chat with some others, and they kind of agreed. It just seemed like it was quite a lot longer, I guess, than.
So question 1 or part 1, you're thinking?
Oh, sorry, question 1 of section 1.
Question 1
so
of section 1.
The bad debts one.
Yeah.
I feel took a bit longer than the rest of it.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else found that.
I think I did in having a look through it. That was the one that, while it's sort of relatively familiar as far as adjustments and that goes, there is a bit to do, and creation of that income statement does take a while. But then hopefully.
But then, like question 3 was quite quick, I think, the budget one. So
the budget one, yeah. And again, a little bit of method in the madness, in the fact that I think looking at the sample wanted to provide something that was familiar to start with. And if you were doing this as a sample and going all the way through, it's probably nice to have that chunky one to get stuck into. It'll take a while, but then, oh, look, I'm getting quicker at this. and they'll sort of get on a bit of a run to question 3. When they get to part 2, that's going to take a while again, but sort of thinking, trying to lay out exams and those sort of things, part of the sort of thought is if students tackle it questions 1 through 4, which most do, we always say them you don't have to do them in that order, but that's what they'll invariably do. Probably didn't want a big question right at the end of the sort of part 1 before they get into the big bit of part 2. So,
and I would add to that, I'm teaching advanced adjustments now, and we're doing past exam question type questions, and it is taking the students longer than any other topic that I've taught. So I think that's probably what it normally is in class anyway, that advanced adjustments are longer because they have to do all the adjustments, do the calculations, then classify and then do the statement. So it is a bit of a process where if you're doing an inventory card, it's very quick, very easy. And then you can do that at the same time as posting to a COGS account or a debtor or an inventory control. So, yeah.
That's great, Graham. Any other burning questions people have at the moment?
You going there, Leslie? You're muted.
I'm just wondering, I know that you showed that. Are you emailing out, releasing the sample exam suggested answers, or what's happening with that?
Yes, I will post this in the Teams environment, but I'll also post it in the Plato environment, Plato Social, so everybody has access to it. And then people can have a look. And I think from the number of queries that are coming through, I'd like it if people were more confident with what they are feeling at the moment. And I think this probably would help settle a few people's fears. And by placing this recording up on to the website, those people who can't attend can actually check in and have a think through about if they have any further questions. So I will post the responses to that sample paper because I think it's been a difficult year all round for everybody anyway. So if there's no other questions and people are feeling kind of okay, there were some other questions that had come in via email, Scott, that those people mightn't be part of this meeting, but may well watch in afterwards. So have we addressed all of those, or is there still a few more outstanding?
There you go. Now you've got more questions coming.
Oh, sorry, Nathaniel, you go.
I've got a couple more coming, but I'll deal with these ones first.
No, that's right. You can go first, Jess.
I was just wondering if there was like an exemplar task of assessment type 2 on the site, because I've had a look and I haven't seen one. I just wanted to make sure that the task that I've given is sufficient or is adequate. I don't know if it's good enough. It's worth 30%. Like it's 30% is a huge amount of the results. So I don't know. I just wondered if there was a sample available.
Anyone happy to share and put one into send it in to me, and we'll have the leadership team or lead practitioners have a look and see if we can put together an exemplar.
I'm happy to share mine through you, Louise.
Okay, thanks, Nathaniel.
Mine have. I can send my task.
Yeah.
Or tasks. They're all doing a different one, so that there's no collaboration.
We're going to have another meeting probably early next term, or just an email. I don't mind. But one of the things that we haven't got up there this year, we used to call it benchmarking. This year we're calling it calibration. And we will need to put together some examples of student work at a range of standards across the assessment types. So we're going to have to ask people to be a bit forthcoming about sharing what they might be assigning, so that we can actually build that capacity for the markers and moderate, or particularly the moderators at the end of the year, to support people to be feeling comfortable about being on standard as well. So
do you want some now, Louise?
Yeah, if you've got something, you've finished an assessment type, you've got a task or several tasks, send me an email and maybe we can upload them in OneDrive or something like that, where it's, or Kiteworks or something that's shareable. And I'm going to gather together my gurus from the practicing teachers and see if we can't assemble some things. And it'd be nice to do that early next term if we could get the ball rolling.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, my question was about just communication, but you go, Graham, first if you wanted. Don't mind.
I was going to talk about assessment type 2. I'm doing it at the end of the course. My last topic is cash flow statements, so I haven't started teaching them yet. So I'm doing advanced adjustments now and then cash flow. And I'm not doing an assessment 81 for cash flow. I'm putting cash flows in my 82. So I'll give the students a balance sheet and income statement, get them prepare a cash flow statement, and then that's where all my advice is going to come from that. I haven't written it yet because obviously it's my last one, so that's what I'll be doing next term, but I'm more than happy to share that once I have finished.
Can I ask, Graham, how long you're allocating to that task? Like, are you giving them time in class, or are you giving them like an extended period out of class? Like, is there a...
Yeah, so I'll probably give my students probably 3 weeks of class time. That's probably all I need. We're quite ahead, so we'll finish advanced adjustments end of this term, and then I've just got cash flows to go, and I'm done. I've finished teaching the whole course.
Oh, wow, okay.
So I've got 24 kids, but they're quite high achievers, and they work really hard.
Yeah.
That's not like every student, so, but yeah. But I would say 3 weeks and homework maximum. Yeah.
Yeah.
My kids did an advice sort of one on cash budgets, where I gave them the budget one, and I got the kids to do that in 2 weeks with no lesson time at all. And they all did that to a very high standard as well. Yeah.
I mean, I think on that one, there's a fair bit of flexibility. I know everyone wants to make sure they're sort of giving the best opportunity for their students, but I just seen Therese appear down the bottom of the screen. So having jumped in, I'm going to sort of not drop you in it, Therese, but just I know you sent an email sort of the other day about sort of what assessment type 2 looked like, and I was really impressed with sort of what you sort of put in there as far as the structure. And I noticed, Claire, you mentioned the fact sort of you were going to try and avoid collaboration. I like collaboration. We want to avoid collusion. That's just my... So and that's my academic...
Collusion. Sorry, yes, we are a team, but we don't have the same.
That's it. So Teresa just sort of put through it, asked the question. So from a collaboration point of view, sort of how that would work, and whether with a small class you could actually get them working on a similar type of task. And the answer to that is yes. I mean, chatting to Louise the other day about a similar sort of thing, but having them all look at maybe the same set of data and then producing different bits of the data and giving different bits of advice is a way you could actually do that, particularly if you've got a small class. So I thought that was a nice way. There's no requirement to collaborate, but sort of it happens in the real world. And if we can get it to happen, I mean, I've sort of floated the idea in the past and whether it sort of ever potentially happens, but even across classes. So for some of you, I know you teach accounting, but you might have a business class as well. And sort of they might have the same students, or they might have different students, and different students potentially works even better, where you might have your accounting students actually do up some accounting reports for your business students for a project or something they've come up with. So there's little ways you can play with a little bit there. So there are a few options there. And I think come moderation time, we'll be looking closely at the tasks, not to see whether you've done the right thing or not, but to see what people have done, and we'll pick out some good ones. And if they're ones that sort of haven't sort of gone as far as they potentially could have, I think we'll sort of try and see what feedback we can give to people to improve for next year. So, yeah, but by you guys sharing tasks and having a look at them, there'll be little bits and pieces you can sort of draw together, I think, as well. Nathaniel, you had a question. You've been waiting patiently.
Oh, no, it's all good. Mine was just more, maybe it's just me wearing a SACE hat, but it was just communication goes around. I find I get lost in having to go across so many different forums. So across Teams and then sometimes into Play-Doh or the COVID portal or the subject-specific portal. And I'm also managing quite a few subjects as well in a coordination role. I just find them going crazy with trying to find where information is. And sometimes, I think it was there, hang on, I'm not sure where it is.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if there's a way that could be streamlined in some way, so I might not be going crazy, but I don't know. I don't know, it might just be me.
No. If you rang me, I'd have to go now, where was that bit there? So look, if you, I don't know. I think a lot of things happened in a big hurry. We use Teams, we use Zoom, we use Plato, we use COVID portal to inform teachers. So hopefully we can get a little bit more streamlined by the end of it. But if you really want to know something quickly, just give us a call, and we should.
Oh, sorry. Sometimes it's just you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And look, don't hang around waiting and wondering. Just get on the phone and ask, what is it I need to ask about this, and where would I find it?
Okay. Yeah.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Scott, always. I just saw that Anne posted in the chat a question about the discount allowed, discount received treatment in the income statement.
Yep. That's on my list, so that one's coming up. Just one last little note I sort of noticed on Teresa's one, and I think you kind of made this point before, Graham, but one of the things Teresa said she was going to do for AT2 was actually use some of the materials that have been done in AT1 tasks. So where there was you said you'd done a budget one and got them to do a bit of advice before, Graham, you could actually go back and pull some of your old things. And again, it's probably something for planning for future years where sort of you might build up a whole sort of body of work over the first half of the year, and then you can bring it all back together and actually really do the advice on if you wanted to. Just another way of approaching it.
The point of that was also to give the students a chance to write as well in accounting terms and using the right terminology in assessments. That's not worth as much as the 30. And my students end up writing a fair bit, which is good. But
That's great. All right then, I might go to Anne's question because it was one of the ones sort of online as well, as far as discount allowed, discount received, income statement, how all these things sort of fit together. I've had a couple of questions about this one. There's two elements to it. So I think the first one, I'm just looking around my screen here to find what I want. I think that's the one. I might just throw this one up as far as layout goes to start with. So I'll see if this behaves for me. There it is. So hopefully you guys can all see the front of one of the pages of the frequently asked questions. In fact, I might even zoom in on that a bit to make it even more obvious. So that one there, just as far as discount allowed and discount received, this is one of the little tweaks, I suppose, for this year. As far as the layout goes, and again, we're back to this idea of there's different ways of doing things in accounting, and having it at a different spot isn't particularly wrong, but this seems to be the preferred way, and sort of all the newer textbooks are following this one. So basically the idea was, from a reporting point of view, trying to link things together. So the discount allowed, rather than it being a financial expense, which is where you would have seen it sort of in the past, we're going to move it up so it's reported up with the sales, because logically you make a sale, if someone then pays for that sale early, they get sort of a discount on that one. So it's really just a sort of moving that one around. Similarly with the discount received, we in the past potentially treated that as another income. It's more related to the actual stock. You get a discount for paying for the stock early, and so slotting it in with the cost of goods sold. And this is where some of the confusion, I think, has become as well, as far as, is it part of cost of goods sold or is it reported in the same way? So from my point of view, this is just how we report them, where we place them on the reports from a layout point of view. And there is an example of this. One of those, I think, is the discount received in the sample exam as well, we get to have a look at, which looks like this. So just getting students to pop them into those two spots rather than another spot on the income statement if they need to do them. The other question I've had around this one is then, particularly when you come to calculate ratios, how these ones fit in. And so, let me find the file I want. It's this one here. Yep. Just get back up to the page I want to show you all. So, find the right one, there it is. So if I swap that one over, hopefully everyone can see the ratio sheet now. I'm getting a nod or two. Yep, good. I can't, the only problem I have with sharing is I can't always see exactly what you guys see, so I'm trusting that it pops up there. So the question I had around this one, there was two of them particularly. One of them was the inventory turnover, because you've got cost of goods sold there, that's not going to work for me, divided by the average inventory figure. And so because we've moved these ones around, the discount that around, do you include the cost of goods sold or the discount in the cost of goods sold? Short answer from my point of view, don't bother. Sort of the way the questions will generally be asked around these ones, you won't be doing a ratio on this one necessarily sort of out of having just created an income statement. It tends to be the cost of goods sold, inventory turnover comes out of a stock card and those sort of things. I do explain it a bit more in the frequently asked questions as well, but the other logic of that one is that the discount you receive is a function of how good you are at getting a discount, not how good you are at selling stock. So it kind of makes logical sense not to include that discount in your inventory turnover calculation. The other way to think of it, I suppose, is if you're looking at inventory turnover, if you're using a perpetual system, then the COGS figure would generally come out of the cost of goods sold account. So you'd probably just grab it from there and grab it from your inventory balances rather than getting it from the income statement. You can get it from there, but that was sort of my logic. And then the same sort of question then came about sort of with the discount allowed, and now that it's being reported up with those sales figures, does that need to be factored into things like the profit margin, gross profit margin, those sort of things? And again, the answer to that one is sort of no, it doesn't need to be included, particularly because if you look at the ratio sheet, the way it's laid out now, the revenue has that little star next to it. And so go down the bottom, it tells you their net sales should be used where possible. And net sales is sales less sales returns. So that's what we're talking about. As far as net sales, it doesn't include the discount. So while it is reported up the top there, next to sales, it's not actually part of the net sales figure. Because my sort of logic a little bit around sales is people don't buy products or aren't enticed to buy products because they can get a discount if they pay early, necessarily. If they can get a discount off the front, they definitely would, but paying early sort of is a decision sort of that comes sort of a little bit later down the track. So does that kind of answer your question a little bit, Anne? I'm thinking that was the question that came out of that one. Or anyone else sort of want some more clarity on that one while we're chatting about it?
So, like I do. So
Yep.
a bit like Leslie said earlier, I didn't see any of that discussion about the change to subject outline till late May.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd already done income statement, balance sheet and balance day adjustments. I do it first.
Yep.
And so it means that what I've taught the students in my assessment is not following your suggestions. I have classified as a finance expense and other revenue.
Mm-hmm.
In the later stuff, I've removed it and waiting.
Yep.
So as not to confuse them. So until I get to revision, then I might just say, oh, this is how we do it now. And a bit like Jess said, they're a bit more familiar and not so distressed by the constant change and rearrange of schedule. But it means that my task again is not going to quite match how you'd like us to do it.
Yeah, and again, I'm given this year and given that we are making the change, I'm not super worried about that. I mean, if you've shown it as a finance expense, sort of hand on sort of my individual point of view, I think it actually should still be a finance expense because it makes more sense to me. but given that's the way it's sort of being reported and sort of being taught from a consistency point of view, looking at putting it up the top is where we want sort of people moving forward. Now, again, if your task
the
looks a little bit,
application and understanding after it with the theory is will be fine. It's just more just literally how I've classified it
and again, when we come to Graham, you were going to.
Yeah, I was going to say, when it comes to moderation, we won't move a student down by just putting something in the wrong place. It won't change.
They'll have the same figure. They should have the same profit figure anyway. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
You know, we tick on the bottom and off we go.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's the other thing with this one, and it's actually an interesting sort of conversation to have sort of with the students at times as well, as far as how these things get reported sort of differently. I mean, a decision somebody's made at some stage, so we probably should move this up at the top now. So it's changed how we're sort of looking at things, and potentially sort of, in this case, we're saying leave it out, so it shouldn't tweak the ratios too much. But I mean, how you classify things can impact on ratios. So students being aware that sort of anything they read depends on who wrote them is actually a good skill sort of for later on as well.
Well, I'm hoping like with the inventory one, I did it a bit like we do anyway, through the stock card and so on. So there was no discount to worry about in there. So that should be okay. It was just more the cost of goods sold inside the income statement.
Inside the income statement, yep. I think they were the only ones that I remember as far as ratios people asking about. And the only other one that I know has been asked about before, I think it's sort of reasonably been covered now, was that change to the quick ratio. It's probably the other significant change that people have seen as far as being cash assets and receivables, just that little tweak there, rather than it being less inventory. That one's just a little bit of a layout one. Right. So that was one of the questions I had. Another one of the questions.
I did notice that one.
You did good.
I got that one right.
And again, a similar question. I think this one sort of came through as far as, sort of, it was a question about whether the ratio sheet had been updated. And so the one that you can see, or the one I showed you on screen before, is the one out of the subject outline, which matches what's in the sample exam, which will match what's in the final exam this year. Just that note on, the ratio sheet doesn't incorporate the discounts into any of the ratios because they don't really fit. So just to reinforce that idea was the question that came through. The other one I had in here was just around, again, getting back to those bad debts, but if there is a situation where there wasn't a provision and a bad debt sort of had been recorded, this was a specific one as far as how does that show up on the income statement? Does there need to be a bad debt expense account and a doubtful debt expense account if they're creating a provision? You could do it that way if you wanted to. My preference would be sort of just to combine them together. That makes more sense to me, just having a single one. Again, there can be situations where you go from not having allowance to creating one where there might have been a bad debt during the year, but given the way sort of it's laid out now in the process it's gone through and what's in the frequently asked questions, I would be expecting any existing bad debts that had been recorded to be closed off to the allowance first anyway. And then going forward, there just won't be a separate bad debt expense. Things will just, when the bad debts occur, they'll be, well, when they are written off, they'll go to the allowance account. And the only time you'll have an adjustment or an expense will be as part of the adjustment. So, but yeah, the term bad debt, doubtful debt, bad and doubtful debts expense, they can be used pretty much interchangeably. Looking at what else I had on my list, I think that was about it. The only other question I did have was as far as sort of, and it wasn't a specific one around resources and those sort of things. I know we've got some goodies up on sort of, there are some on the team site that people have shared. I have seen some other emails floating around from teachers that have shared in a sort of a smaller group, and I have actually asked if they don't mind them being shared a bit more broadly. So, because it's work that other teachers, I do want to ask them before I just give it away, but I think I'll sort of see what we can actually share a little bit more. Yeah.
I would just love to see some examples of that AT2. So that's
the big one.
Yeah. that just so heavily weighted. It would just be good to kind of get some feedback and ideas from others as well.
Yep. No, I think that's a reasonable request, Jessica. I think they were the main ones on my list that I got sent in. Are there any others, Louise, that you can think of, or anything else?
I've flicked you through most of the ones that have, well, if not all of the ones that have come up.
Yep.
And I'm looking at the time and I'm thinking, well, probably everybody's had a pretty long day. So unless there's something immediate or you think we've not covered off, we're sort of just about out of time. Good job. Thank you so much. And thank you for participating. And I'm hoping that for those who couldn't attend, and you can go back and listen to something again if you would like to, in terms of that clarification or clarity. So any last takers? We good? All right. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Graham and Scott, for all your work, and particularly Scott, because basically you did most of the work. So, but yeah, so good luck, everyone, and hope you have a really lovely break in 10 days' time. Was it, Graham?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Louise,
Yes,
can I just...
7.
No, we've got 2 days to go.
2.
2.
2 more sleeps.
Louise, can I just stick behind and ask you a question?
Sure can.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
No worries.